when you hear an Iranian say something like, I'm willing to tolerate a missile to my house that kills me, so that my compatriots in my country can be free, or when they say things like, I'm willing to tolerate a decade of blackouts for 8 hours every single day, so that I have a chance at life for the first time after 10 years. The problem is the West does not understand the desperation yet of the Iranian people.
With a fragile ceasefire talks expected in Islamabad,
this is further proof that the Islamic Republic is a poor guardian of the Iranian national interest. Because at a time when it stands to potentially get so much from a ceasefire, it is not concerned about rebuilding its country. It is concerned more about stabilizing its proxy than rebuilding itself.
One of the things that I don't want to lose in this conversation is the Iranian people themselves. And I know that you always talk about Iranian people as well.
In a world in which people forgot that there was a world under Barack Obama where we had oil at 140, where we had the last time oil go to triple digits in the recent history was during the Ukraine war, which so many Americans, at least for the first year, seem to support. But all of a sudden, when it comes to Iran, 6 weeks is too much.
Talking about the Strait of Hormuz, it remains one of the biggest pressure points. If Tehran keeps using it as a leverage, even short of full closure,
they have neither forgotten anything nor learned anything. If the Islamic Republic thinks at this point in time that playing for time at the negotiating table is a wise strategy and that it will work against someone like President Donald Trump, in the beginning of the tweet, people are saying civilizational erasure. In the bottom, he's saying, God bless the people of Iran. So even within one tweet, there is a 180-degree difference. Talk about hedging. Talk about keep your options open. The top, he's going maximalist hardcore. In the middle, he's going Ghalibaf Venezuela. In the end, he's going regime change, liberate the people of Iran in one post.
We know that Tehran and Washington are really far apart. Which demands are negotiable and which ones are fundamentally incompatible?
I would say the chances of an actual agreement based on a bridging proposal is slim to none, unless you have, a cave in the U.S. position, unless you have the Iranians saying one thing publicly and doing another thing privately, or you have a real surrender by Tehran.
Welcome back. Today's guest is Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Director of the Iran Program and the Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He is one of the sharpest Iran analysts working today, with deep expertise on the Islamic Republic security doctrine, missile program, regional strategy, and the internal logic of the regime itself. His work consistently connects what happens inside Iran to what the regime does across the region. Behnam, it's great to have you back on Beyond the Summit.
Great to be with you, Amir. A pleasure.
The last time we spoke was February 27, and what stayed with me was how precise your reading was. We talked about scenarios, about escalation, about where this could go, and within hours, the region moved in exactly the direction you warned about. Now here we are again, Friday, April 10th, with a fragile ceasefire talks expected in Islamabad, open questions about Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Strait of Hormuz, and above all, the future of Iran itself.
Well, like I said, it's always a pleasure to be with you. And I had no idea that I had such strategic foresights because it seemed to be like a matter of when rather than if the Trump administration may attack. But now we're in an entirely different phase. The administration is now in a 2.5, if not 3-day reported ceasefire with the Islamic Republic. But even the word ceasefire is highly tenuous because the one premise for this is being hotly debated. Will ships be able to still pass through the Strait of Hormuz? That's really debatable. Will this be linked to Lebanon? That is really debatable. And will things stop going boom inside Iran? That's also quite debatable. Don't take it from me, take it from this posting we saw just a few days ago on Persian language social media, I think within maybe half a day to 1 day when the ceasefire was reported. And it was just a regular Iranian individual briefly connected to the internet and said, man, I can't sleep due to the sound of the ceasefire, meaning things are still being exploded. There is still a war going on in the region. So the first thing I would say is that while the moment we're at, the inflection point we're at is historic, history yet has not been made. Why am I saying that? The regime is defanged, but it is certainly not destroyed. There is a big difference between capabilities that are disabled and set back versus permanently taken offline. There is a difference between a regime that is looking to make amends and limp along rather than rebuild and survive for the purposes of taking revenge. And ultimately, lies will be on the next proximate political event, which is, I think, the highest level physical negotiations since the 1979 revolution, where indirectly you will have the vice president, the number two of the United States of America, indirectly being in negotiation with a government official of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The last highest level direct thing I can think of was a phone call between then President Barack Obama and then President Hassan Rouhani in September 2013 on the sidelines of the UNGA. But I can't think anything as high level or physical as since the hostage crisis, particularly the diplomacy with then, I think, State Department official Warren Christopher. So suffice to say, we're in a historical moment, but history has not yet been made. It is way too premature to talk about peace. Those who see this as the springboard to turn off the conflict in the region and move towards not just diplomacy, but deal making and normalization, might, with respect, be missing the fact that we don't even know the framework for which these talks will be held. Is it President Trump's previously reported 15 points? Have those 15 points pre-February 28 held across the board now? Is it the newly reported Iranian 10 points, first seen in Iranian traditional media like newspapers, then social media? Or is it a revised version of that, as the White House, and in particular the White House press secretary, alleges? We don't even know the baseline for these talks. But what is critical is that the Islamic Republic is looking to engage, not for the purposes of sanctions relief, but to secure physical and political survival, and that the Americans are looking to engage for the purposes of deconfliction and de-escalation to turn off a conflict that was initially about politics and security and quickly morphed into one that was about energy and economics.
I really love what you said. Right now, let's break it down, to smaller pieces to make it more understandable for the average audience that either listening or watching. So is it fair to say that it is just a pause between phases of the same war?
Potentially. It could be a pause between different phases of the same war or the same phase of the same war. If we're going to look at history and be objective, Donald Trump has only struck the Islamic Republic of Iran when in the middle of negotiations. That was the case in June, and that was the case in February. So if past is prologue, once negotiations commence, the trend line indicates that that is a greater harbinger of military action than sanctions or some kind of other diplomatic or political crisis. So there's that to note. The second is, what does the administration think the next phase ought to be? Meaning, let's pretend there is a deal. Let's pretend there is no deal. What is the next thing in the White House's Iran strategy? Is it just resuming the conflict that it already has the capabilities in the region for? The president has been quite clear that he's keeping the assets in the region as some sort of a deterrence to make sure that you can get an actual agreement rather than to have to bring them back and take them out and bring them back and take them out again. But
Right.
if it's a political strategy, what does post-war containment look like? What does post-war rollback look like? Is there a post-war covert strategy that we're not privy to and don't know about? And what will Israel's role be in all of this, given the fact that this is America negotiating, but also with an eye towards what Jerusalem has and hasn't been able to do in the past 6 weeks on the ground in Iran?
Obviously, they are all great questions and a lot to think about. So realistically, who does this 2-week pause benefit from more? Is it the US allowing them to reposition assets and drop oil prices as we have already seen that? Or is it the IRGC resupplying maybe by the help of Russian and Chinese?
I think, unfortunately, politically, any pause benefits the Islamic Republic and, in particular, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps because it releases the momentum. It takes the boot off the neck. Even if the architecture is still there, even if the sword of Damocles is still there, once you turn on and turn off the spigot of conflict, of actual overt conventional military power, that does something to the psyche. And we have to remember the Islamic Republic's real war here is the media war, is the narrative war. And again, the administration's willingness to be seen as seeking a ceasefire and willingness to be seen as seeking an off ramp, as much as the administration has talked about destruction and energy, and all the other rest of these things, it has equal chapter and verse for seeking diplomacy and de-escalation. And that unfortunately does redound to the political advantage of the IRGC and what's left of this national security deep state. Now, you might say, practically, what can the regime do with this? Literally, they won't be able to build back within a period of 2 weeks anyway.
No.
Sanctions relief is not coming in a matter of 2 weeks anyway. So materially, I would say it actually makes very little impact for the Islamic Republic, but politically, it is huge. It is a geopolitical earthquake for these guys who, perhaps you can translate this better than I can, Veli. They believe that like they believe that they puff their chest, that wind is, on their double chin, that they can be hubristic about this
Right. Right.
because they believe they have fought, at least in their view, even though they haven't seen exactly, there's still the fog of war. They haven't seen exactly how much they have lost militarily, but they have fought a regional military power and they have fought a global military power. And to that end, the sense of or desire for diplomacy or ceasefire from the administration feeds into that sense of self. Now, some might say that this could be a ploy or a trap by the Trump administration, given the timeline. So we won't know. But politically, it benefits the Islamic Republic. Materially, it could benefit America because of one, the ability to calm oil prices, and number two, the ability to more meaningfully resupply. In terms of the logistics chain, this certainly benefits America much more than it benefits Iran. My fear here is, one group we haven't talked about, which is the Iranian people. I do believe that politically and perhaps, God forbid, psychologically, they may be the one who might feel the most embittered, embattled, and afraid by this pause.
So I really love that. And you are one of the few people who always talk about Iranian people. I really appreciate that. So, Behnam, there are rumors that Pakistan is using euphemism to bridge the gap between the US 15-point plan and the 10-point counter proposal by Iranian side. In your experience, when a mediator softens the language of a regime that just lost its supreme leader, is that a path to peace or a recipe for more dangerous misunderstanding?
It's at least in Pakistan's mind, and this is a very interesting phenomenon I think your viewers and listeners would benefit from. There is a whole constellation of countries that historically have tried to play the role of mediator or moderator between Tehran and between Washington. Sometimes there's people, sometimes they're businesses, but more often than not, they're countries with their own independent interests that are nested into the larger US Iran strategic competition or even collaboration and cooperation. And Pakistan is no different in that sense than Turkey, which is no different than Qatar or Oman, more importantly, or in the past, France and Germany, more importantly, or even in the past, Russia and even the EU. So, to that end, we have to see and understand what are Pakistan's stakes in this regionally. What might they want from the US to use this as a bid to generate leverage for in the future? Who are Pakistan's patrons and allies? Hint, hint, China. That matters very much for the future of great power competition and what Southwest Asia and even South Asia may look like in the next 20 years. So there's all these moving parts here that we have to be aware of, and that I think Pakistan is trying to nest its own independent interest set into, which I think we can't lose sight of. But certainly any mediator or moderator that takes this position does what any skilled diplomat would do, which they call these things bridging proposals, where privately they took these two things, they try to find the least common denominator, and then they present them publicly. And I think the Pakistanis will have quite a hard time if what is reported about the US 15 points and what is reported about the Iranian 10 points are what they are. You're going to need a lot more than a bridge, because the distance between these two things, even pre war, not even politically, not even based on the facts on the ground, but philosophically, the distance was huge. That distance, in my view, had grown rather than was shrunk with 6 weeks of conflict and overt fighting. But there's some people who believe that the conflict actually raised the stakes and therefore increased the chances. I'm at this moment in time not one of those people. So I would say the chances of an actual agreement based on a bridging proposal is slim to none, unless you have, a cave in the US position, unless you have the Iranians saying one thing publicly and doing another thing privately, or you have a real surrender by Tehran. Absent one of these three things, that which Pakistani diplomats or any real skilled diplomat may be able to do vis-a-vis a bridging proposal will be politically impressive, but strategically dubious because there is so much distance, and the conflict, in my view, has magnified that distance.
Right. Iran has always shown real skill at the negotiating table. It knows how to buy time, fragment pressure, and survive. When you look at these talks, what do you think Tehran is really trying to achieve right now?
I'm glad you mentioned the buying time, and I want to allude to an analogy that you as an Iranian in the diaspora know all too well, which is the Islamic Republic is in so many ways a dichotomy. We talk about them as being militarily weak, yet they have a missile force that continues to perform even 6 weeks into the war. We talk about them as being these strategic negotiators and deal makers and Bazari types, but their maximalist demands and their method and their style tends to impede their substance. And if past this prologue, even at the negotiating table, the Iranians can overplay their hand. And we've seen that in the past as well. And the question is, if you're looking at Iran's diplomatic posture now, their negotiating position now, never mind the fact that it's unclear how coordinated it is within this system at this moment in time, because this is a crisis. We have real questions over command and control. These are more personalist networks within institutions that matter very much at this moment. Now, the Islamic Republic is a system of men, quite literally. So it's about understanding the men at the helm. It doesn't mean it's a personalist system. Khamenei indeed has institutionalized his power, and there's always a number two, three, four, and we've seen them rise up in the ranks. But their ability to talk and coordinate and intonate has really been strained by the conflict. So, what kind of a strategy they can get off the ground is a real question here. And how can they coordinate that? And you will see that already with reports of the IRGC commander and the IRGC Aerospace Force commander not wanting missiles to be included in these talks. Real concerns of could Ghalibaf go rogue, given not that he's a pragmatist or a moderate, but at the least, given that he's some ambitious guy. There's that there. There's the question of stylistically, what is IRGC going to be doing there, representing the foreign ministry? Whose vested stake is that in the quote unquote civilian government? What's left of the quote unquote civilian government? So there's a lot more questions than answers here. But to bring it down to the heart of your question, traditionally, Iran does indeed play for time and try to divide a multilateral consensus that is against it. But if the regime plays for time here, that is real proof that it will have lived up to the Talleyrand's quotes, the famous French diplomat in the Napoleonic era, who said about the Bourbon dynasty that they have neither forgotten anything nor learned anything. If the Islamic Republic thinks at this point in time that playing for time at the negotiating table is a wise strategy, and not only is a wise strategy, but that it will work against someone like President Donald Trump, who clearly has limited patience for diplomacy and who even clearly has limited patience for military operations. If they think that he will be just okay with them running the clock on him, I think they really would not have learned the lessons of June last year, and they really would not have learned the lessons of March, April this year. So yes, everything you said is the norm, is the past precedent about Iranian negotiating behavior. But now that trend line needs to meet reality. And the question is, how will it do that?
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, they have shown that they're really good at playing a bad hand, but hopefully this time is different. We know that Tehran and Washington are really far apart. Which demands are negotiable and which ones are fundamentally incompatible?
Even those which might be negotiable, hypothetically, if there's a collapse in the Iranian position, or they play this game of Mr. Inside says this, Mr. Outside says this, Ghalibaf privately promises this, Arakshi publicly dismisses this, but they have some sort of mutual arrangement, modus vivendi understanding with the American about thresholds and escalation and what they will do and what they won't do for a certain period of time. They come up with a memorandum of understanding that governs any kind of agreement or any kind of framework that comes out of this. Well, I would again have real concerns about verifiability. The Iranians can come tomorrow to Vance, Kushner, and Witkoff and say, we will not support Hezbollah anymore. Done. Even though they're talking very much about linking the theater to Lebanon. My question is not how do you bridge this proposal? My question is how do you verify this concession in time?
Yeah.
And is this concession worthwhile? So it's not, to me, the 10 points versus the 15 points. Some of them are philosophical. The US doesn't recognize countries' rights to enrich, even though some countries do enrich. We don't see that as an inherent right. but the Iranians want recognition of that inherent right. Those two things are politically incompatible. Some will want to square the enrichment debate, say, okay, Iran is not enriching now, so why don't we just give this as some sort of fake concession to America? The problem is, if you give this as a concession to America, America better not pay anything for it. America can say, oh, yes, I detect that Iran is not enriching uranium, but I don't recognize that they have a future right to. But if Iran makes you pay to say this statement, then you will have paid for something at the negotiating table in 2026 which you militarily took away from them already in 2025. So the
Right.
skill the Iranians have is to pocket concessions that you give them and that they will make you pay for something that you got already. So we have to be aware of that too. And then
Fantastic points. Yeah.
those are the big fears, the verifiability and the paying for something that you already got, or not understanding that there is a philosophical divide. So there are some things that you can probably get a limited agreement on, but it'll only be for time. But that will replicate the criticisms that even candidate Trump had of an agreement like the JCPOA in 2015. Given how murky the 10 to 15 points are, I prefer not to get into more specifics, but just look at these things when we look at the news on Saturday. How will your audience know what matters? Did they philosophically cave on something? Did they end up paying for something that they already got previously? Or is this an Iranian move of pocketing a concession and pretending it never happened? Beware of these three things.
Absolutely. There is also a lot of talk right now about the tactical success, operational success, degraded capabilities, as we all know. But when you strip away the headlines, what has truly changed inside the Islamic Republic and what has not changed at all?
Well, the trend line is that the systems the regime has cared about only matter more rather than less for this regime, which means getting them at the negotiating table has actually become harder, not easier, because they've seen and sensed the utility of it more than ever before. For example, to get the uranium, in so many weird ways, leaving the uranium underground in Iran in so many ways ensures that the regime survives. So it's the reverse of the nuclear logic, where you create a nuclear weapon as a deterrent for your survival. Now, if they leave the material in tombs, they create the case to not have any further pressure against them. So, we have to be aware of that logic. Next is, what has been degraded versus destroyed. I think there's still considerable work to do against Iran's ballistic missile program, given that there's a difference between sites that have been struck versus sites that have been destroyed. But that which has been struck, which matters very much, given that the US has done it this time, rather than Israel being the one to do it in June 2025 and October 2024, is ballistic missile production. In particular, given reporting, given commercially available satellite imagery, which these days is not as good for political reasons and because there's delays in the passes, Hojir, Shahrud, Parchin, Semnan, Hakimiyeh, and maybe even Esfahan, pay attention to these sites in that order and what the regime does in these places that could allow it to reconstitute over time. But the first few, particular Hojir, Shahrud, for example, where motor production is happening, where there is assembly of actual physical components, that hardware has been taken offline more. So that reduces the ability of the post-war bounce back of the regime. And then when you marry that with strikes against, like Iran's steel industry, strikes against Iranian metallurgy sites, strikes against Ministry of Defense contractors like Shiraz Electronics Institute, for example, you look at this industrial assets that exist that support the national security deep state, but that also support these capabilities. That also puts time back on America and Israel's side in a post-conflict scenario because it makes the growth spurts less speedy and with more distance in between them. So in essence, the striking of the defense industrial base, the striking of the production facilities may have mattered more in terms of dealing a blow against Iran's ballistic missiles, which again have grown in importance for this regime after this conflict, than the bases that they're housed in or the launchers that fire them.
Right. Some people are already trying to sell the idea of what could emerge from this is a more pragmatic or more manageable version of the Islamic Republic. Based on everything you know, do you buy that at all?
I would no, I would say with respect, I don't see it, and not because I have some ideological filter or disposition. I would tell you, like Ghalibaf, the challenge with him is that the West will mistake ambition for pragmatism and moderation. And just because somebody is corrupt within one kind of context doesn't mean he can be corrupt across a host of other contexts. Meaning the forces that enable his personal corruption inside a system like the Islamic Republic does not mean that you can translate him to become Delcy Rodriguez of Iran. In particular, those same forces that enable corruption also limit his freewheeling on strategic issues. They may enable him to become a major rentier state beneficiary, a major illicit financier, but those same dark networks also would box in someone even with the most pragmatic and opportunistic streaks. And Ghalibaf's career and certainly his rhetoric most recently have proven to work to indicate the exact opposite, that he doesn't have those streaks, that he actually is a believer and a member of this hardline establishment, no matter of his personal ambition. So given that his name is the one most associated with the sign or the allegation of a potential pragmatic post-conflict Islamic Republic of Iran, and that being his background, I don't see that, which is why me and a friend at this other organization at Mufti, Andrew Khalili, we had a piece in the Washington Post recently basically saying that Iran is not Venezuela and that Delcy Rodriguez and Mohammed Bagher Ghalibaf is not Delcy Rodriguez. And the
Right.
Iranian state, Iranian society, and the Iranian military capabilities are not Venezuela's state, are not Venezuela's society, are not Venezuela's military capabilities.
Right. Iranian version of Kim Jong-un is more probable, I believe.
Yeah, and I'm glad a lot of people are saying that. That's not meant to deny the impressive military achievements that America has had, but it should be, and I've actually been saying this since the conflict started, because there is a start-stop mentality to a lot of things President Trump does, because he doesn't just do one thing, because he wouldn't put he never puts his political capital in one thing. He advances multiple lines of argumentation and effort at the same time. I mean, even that tweet that we saw the morning before the ceasefire, the very deplorable thing about civilizational erasure, people forget. Do you know how that tweet ended? In the beginning of the tweet, people are saying civilizational erasure. In the bottom, he's saying, God bless the people of Iran. So even within one tweet, there is a 180-degree difference. Talk about hedging, talk about keep your options open. And in the middle, what is he saying of that tweet? He said, we've already had regime change. So on the top, he's going maximalist hardcore. In the middle, he's going Ghalibaf Venezuela. In the end, he's going regime change, liberate the people of Iran in one post. So
Just one post, yeah.
this talk about the hyper evident, hyper public definition of keep your options open. So I don't believe that the US buys that anymore, that this model is possible. I believe that's something that they want because it's a lower cost.
General Kane says 80% of their missiles industry is shattered, but that leaves 20% dispersed and hidden. In a region as dense as the GCC, isn't that 20% enough to still hold the global energy market hostage if the Islamabad Trap fails?
It is. And I fear what is holding the global energy sector hostage, which is I'm very disappointed in two things: markets and media. In particular, I'm going to butcher this line from Tom Schelling, so forgive me. I forget which book it was in. It might be Arms and Influence or Strategy of Conflict. But they talk about pain and deterrence and thresholds being two-sided. There's the infliction of pain and there's the acceptance of pain. And the Islamic Republic, per Tom Schelling, has been very good about that willingness to accept pain as much as it's trying to inflict pain. But what they sensed this time was that our risk tolerance, not even in terms of casualties, because yes, 13 is way too many, but we have to remember even the US had 19 casualties in a conflict like Grenada, which people have forgotten about here in Washington, D.C. But you go down to the cost, just a $1 price spike in oil domestically here for the pump when you go to put gas in the car, that has changed a lot of things. In a world in which people forgot that there was a world under Barack Obama where we had oil at 140, where we had the last time oil go to triple digits in the recent history was during the Ukraine war, which so many Americans, at least for the first year, seem to support. But all of a sudden, when it comes to Iran, 6 weeks is too much. And so the Islamic Republic was able to threaten those exact same forces, not only with the 20% of what's left of the industry, which is very different than what's left of the arsenal, because I fear that so many deliberations about the size of the arsenal had actually been for the medium-range systems capable of carrying a nuclear warhead, capable of striking Israel or further afield bases from Iranian territory. But to
Right.
strike the GCC 300 to 400 kilometers max, 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 particularly Iran's short-range, single-stage precision strike ballistic missiles that are among its most effective and among its most precise, no, I fear they have a lot more. I fear they have a lot more. I fear they're entombed and dispersed. And geography here absolutely is one of the things that is a weapon on the side of the Iranians. And talking about that geography with its limited military capability, the thing which spooked markets and the thing which spooked media was the reported 10 to 12 mines in the Strait of Hormuz. That's it. And that's why the real strategic indictment is not that America didn't plan or didn't know Hormuz, but that how the Islamic Republic could do so much with so little. If you look at the previous examples, the tanker war in the 1980s, the regime threw so much out there. You look at the mid 2000s when the European oil boycott happened after the US oil sanctions. The regime threatened to close the strait. President Obama then brought a second carrier into the region. Everything was okay. Then you look at Trump, term one max pressure, Iranian limpet mining, sticking them on the bottom of these tankers. That was huge. But none of these things had the market or media impact of today. And it's so odd that the Islamic Republic has been able to generate that with so much less. Literally think 10 to 12 mines here rather than, hundreds, if not thousands, of short-range ballistic missiles.
Right. Talking about the Strait of Hormuz, it remains one of the biggest pressure point in the whole story that we're talking about. If Tehran keeps using it as a leverage, even short of full closure, how does that change the strategic picture for the US, the Gulf, and the wider war?
Well, it means we need a real resolution here. It means that you're going to have to fight your way through the strait. It means that you're going to have to meaningfully destroy and degrade Iranian coastal defenses. The difference is to degrade them, you have to stay there to make sure they don't reconstitute. Or it means that you pressure the regime in so many other ways that they choose to give up this IRGC toll booth situation. Because basically coming up with a tiered entry system to enter and exit an international waterway, even though Iran and America, believe it or not, are not signatories to the UN Law of the Sea, or this Law of the Sea, I forget the actual name of the Convention on the Law of the Sea, or whatever the full name is called.
Right.
Many other countries are. And the UAE, for example, just across the Persian Gulf, has a pretty significant stake in this. And they actually, I think their MFA or MOD tweeted something about this to this effect, that you can't just hijack an international waterway and toll it and enforce commercial vessels to have to traverse through your territorial waters where they're at the 100% mercy of your coastal defenses and what's left of your Navy. So for Donald Trump, for markets, for media, for the international community, for the energy trade, we are going to have to find a real resolution to this challenge in the Strait of Hormuz. And that is the lifeline now that the Islamic Republic will trade, not necessarily for sanctions relief, but for its survival. And because it knows that we want this, it will ask for more things on top of it, which get to why the Iranian proposal, the 10 points, is so heavy-handed and why so much of it is about getting rid of U.S. bases, doing these things that its foreign policy, its security policy had failed to achieve. And now that they sensed there was an opportune moment with the war, to nest those larger concerns into this problem and send it Washington's way and say, you're concerned about this? Well, you're going to have to address all of this.
Right. Some people even believe that, having control of Strait of Hormuz is more effective than having nuclear weapon. Behnam, you mentioned, other ways of putting more pressure on Iran. Can the regime sustain itself financially and strategically through this kind of controlled pressure?
The regime may, and it gets harder and harder and harder, but so much depends on where will the Trump administration's maximum pressure policy be at time one, time two, time three. I'm working on an article right now. I simply haven't had enough time behind the computer physically. Uh, but where is Operation Economic Epic Fury? We just had Operation Epic Fury, the military. Where is the economic version of it?
Right.
Why is the economic activities of the Treasury Department right now limited to giving waivers so that Iranian oil tankers, which are already loaded and out to sea, able to sell their oil without sanctions anyway? We need to think about an economic strategy that crunches that last capability to bounce back and build back better, that makes even tougher budgetary choices for a post-conflict Islamic Republic, and that learns the lessons of containing a system that is authoritarian, oil-rich, and missile-laden, like Saddam's regime was after 91 and that Khamenei Jr.'s regime is after 2026, and learns the lessons of the 1990s containment without making the mistakes of the 1990s containment. And here I have a real question as to, well, what is that for the Trump administration? I have some ideas, but what is Uncle Sam's approach? What is the timeline they have for that? Because certainly you want to keep shrinking the pie. And the more you shrink the pie, yes, the more cohesive the elites become. But given that you've already put military pressure on these elites, and now you're financially constricting them, they come together. But the more you financially constrict them, and the more the prospect of a turned on war, these systems that don't bend break. And that's where you have your real opportunity. And that's the question is, does the Trump administration know that? Is this part of their strategy? What is the timetable for this strategy? And how much investment do they have in this approach?
Right. Now let's talk about geography and GCC countries. What do you think the Gulf states learned from this war? And what does this moment to do their long-term view of Iran deterrence and self-protection?
Well, there's a great Napoleon quote that throughout some of the early images of this war kept coming to my mind, particularly the drone strike against the Burj Al Arab Hotel, where the shrapnel fell into the bottom of the hotel, which was when your enemy is making a mistake, don't interrupt him. And it really was a mistake for the Islamic Republic to internationalize the war and internationalize it so quickly. Now they believe it paid off because they went for the Strait eventually. They made a conflict about, again, politics and security into energy and economics, but they may have lost the economic artery that they had for so many years. I mean, don't forget, UAE was a top sanctions buster during term one Trump max pressure, a top 5 importer of Iranian petrochemicals, which was a major non-oil in terms of US sanctions law, non-oil, but it's an oil derivative product supporting the Iranian economy and supporting the Islamic Republic's illicit activities, whether it's missile, military, nuclear, or anything else, is the main revenue stream. Just like that's why the Trump administration went after industrial metals and steel rather than the old school approach of the Obama administration, which was just precious metals, were things that the Islamic Republic had on its side, basically regional trade,
Right.
non-dollar denominated trade, bartering, money laundering, illicit networks through a whole host of countries geographically where it was more permissible and easier to deal with this stuff. I think because of the war, those days are going to be gone. The UAE will have changed. It will be a critical American national security prerogative to hold UAE's hand, to help them on the sanctions front, on the immigration front, on the defense front, become better and better and better, to identify licit and illicit, abusive and real immigration to their country, to identify what is a legitimate businesses, what is a sanctions busting venture, and to really spend time twisting the arm of the Islamic Republic in this place that has been for far too long a permissive jurisdiction for, like Turkey, like Malaysia, like Hong Kong, like China, a permissive jurisdiction for some Western components, but also for trade and to touch the international economy, to touch the international financial system. So that is one big thing that I think will change, and America will have to be on top of it. The second thing is just the nature of order. The fact that the Islamic Republic struck Qatar and Oman, that tells you a lot. Washington now really does have to go to its friends in the region and hold them together and say, listen, I'm here for you, even though like there are real concerns about America's staying power, will, force posture in the region post-conflict. They have to understand that one reason that they were able to shoot down so much was because of Western, in particular American military technology, and that these are the ties that bind. China will be right there behind America trying to undermine that case and trying to talk about, no, this is the era of economic interdependence, and therefore you have to pay to play and get along. But America is really going to have to hold the line. The challenge is if the GCC zooms out, they will see a very turbulent relationship with America over regional security, such as the invasion of Iraq, such as the Syrian civil war, such as the JCPOA nuclear negotiations with Iran, such as the Yemen war, such as oil politics during the Ukraine war period, the Khashoggi affair, the GCC Qatar crisis, you name it. There has been a very turbulent relationship. And now is the time, given how overt and damaging this conflict has been, for America to come and rebuild the tent and bring those pieces together. Because if we leave them down on the field, on the chessboard, that's where the Islamic Republic bilaterally and a la carte. I think I don't know if the line is actually in Machiavelli or not, but people have ascribed it to him. They say politica del carciofo, or the politics of the artichoke. You take one at a time. Sometimes in America they call it salami slices, salami tactics. That's where Iran, that's where China will come to our friends and deal with them one at a time, play up their grievances and concerns, some of which are correct given some of the foreign policy failures America had in the region over the past 2 decades, but some of which are unfounded. And so there is a real need. The blaring red light is, what will America do to build a better post-war order in the region? And that actually begins not with Israel. That relationship is clear. That relationship is stable. That actually begins with the GCC countries. And it is precisely because of geography. It is precisely because they are critical American partners, but they live closest to and they're on the front lines of the Iranian threat.
Yeah, I love it. I personally believe they shoot themselves in the foot by attacking neighboring countries. Now, let's talk about, proxies. Hezbollah has always been one of the most important extensions of Iranian power. By Iranian power, I mean Islamic regime, obviously. After everything that has happened, what do you think Hezbollah's future look like?
I think it's grim. You can be grim and glib and doom and gloom, but still survive. But I mean, Hezbollah still is a terrorist organization at the end of the day, just like the Islamic Republic is a terror regime. One reason where they can do more with less when you shrink the pie is because they simply, every time you put them to the choice of guns versus butter, they will pick guns. They will pick the thing that maximizes the pain and maximizes also what they can get as terms of military capability or economic wherewithal or political wherewithal at that moment in time for the terror group rather than for the population. And in a world in which Lebanese society has seen the decline of the state towards failed state status because of Hezbollah, and at the same time where Iranians have seen the decline of their state towards failed state status, not because of military force by America or Israel, but because of path-dependent conscious choices by Ali Khamenei and his clique over the past 37 years, you have a really dangerous phenomenon here where America, Israel, whoever may weaken Hezbollah, but that weakness entrenches it. We have to think more comprehensively now. And I know that's very, very hard because Hezbollah is so embedded, and the desire and the will in the international community to deal with dislodging it is so high, let alone the capability to do that is so low. Same with the Lebanese government. You might hear really great things out of Beirut, but the capability to physically help the Israelis with that dislodging mission, which, as you see, is politically very precocious. And next week, there will be negotiations allegedly in D.C. between the Lebanese government and Israel over the fate of what happens in that country. This jigsaw puzzle only offers the Islamic Republic the opportunity to press its advantage and to test how concerned is America and test how concerned is Israel. Certainly,
Right.
Prime Minister Netanyahu already said, well, we're not going to be stopping operations there anytime soon. But the Trump administration seemingly backtracked. And because these negotiations will be held next week in Lebanon, given in DC about Lebanon, and given the fact that it looks like the Islamic Republic won't settle for a ceasefire unless there's a way to save its most preferred proxy, one of its most successful proxies, Lebanese Hezbollah. This is going to be, again, a game of chicken. Both sides are going to play to the edge. Now, to me, just again, as an Iranian American, but also as an analyst here, this is further proof that the Islamic Republic is a poor guardian of the Iranian national interest. Because at a time when it stands to potentially get so much from a ceasefire, it is not concerned about rebuilding its country. Remember the guns or butter analogy? It is concerned more about stabilizing its proxy than rebuilding itself. And again, that
Right.
is the revolutionary ideology over the national interest. This is, even Ghalibaf is pushing for this. So this is at the heart of the problem of why these men will not change and why their ideology matters very much. So keep your eyes on America, and will they try to do something substantively between Israel and Lebanon, or is it just stylistic to try to fool the Iranians to think that they will? We won't know until those negotiations happen next week, but certainly that means the military operations by Israel against Hezbollah is going to continue, which means the chances of Iran walking out of the ceasefire because of this ideological preference to save, as you rightly mentioned, that successful proxy is so high, even though the chance of resuming strikes against its own country are also so high. And don't take it from me, take it from Vice President Vance, who just a few days ago said this. He said we think it would be a dumb idea to throw away the ceasefire to save Hezbollah, but that's their prerogative, That is the prerogative of the Islamic Republic to make these poor trade-offs just like we've seen them make these poor trade-offs for the past 47 years.
I love that. So Hezbollah is on one side. The other side, we can talk about the Houthis. The Houthis have been disruptive, but not yet decisive in a way some feared. In your view, what role do they still play in this conflict, especially around maritime pressure and the Red Sea?
Well, the good news is that they did not function as the second horn of the, Iranian maritime strategy at the same time. The fear here was when the Houthis were doing the Red Sea threat with the IRGC magnified in the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz, and now that the IRGC has been doing it there with the Houthis come online. Thus far, that threat, thank God, has not materialized. That would be a real body blow to markets and media who are already very skeptical about this kind of operation anyway. But the Houthis did, as you know, attempt to fire several times and attempt to strike Israel with medium-range ballistic missiles during this conflict. To date, that seems more stylistic than substantive, a bit more performative, shall we say. And perhaps it is because of Saudi Arabia's quiet diplomacy with the Houthis or intelligence game vis-a-vis the Houthis. And as much as I may not like the pay to delay or the pay to play approach, keeping the Houthis offside right now is key. The question is, what will the strategy be towards the Houthis in a post-conflict scenario? And will the Houthis have the capability to turn that cycle of violence back on? Yes, they will. But what can we do meaningfully to impact their calculus, to get them offside, to weaken them, to deter them? That's the open question here. And I fear that America, Saudi, and Israel may not be on the same page as how to deal with this in the short term.
Sure. So, Behnam, one of the things that I don't want to lose in this conversation is the Iranian people themselves. And I know that you always talk about Iranian people as well. In all of this military and diplomatic analysis, where do you think the human reality inside Iran is being missed most daily right now?
I heard this on a call-in show because one of the few ways, just like in January, where you can get consistent information out of Iran is landline. They have to spend the money to make the international call. Certainly, the international call is monitored, so the regime both generates revenue and also, gets to collect intel or monitor intel. But Iranians have been incredibly brave, and Iranian Americans and others have let me sit in and listen on their calls without saying anything, with the permission of people back in Iran, obviously. And some of the things you hear is heartbreaking, but I'll just pivot to something that was said publicly on a call-in show on Iran International that had nothing to do with me, that had everything to do with the fear that this individual, his name was allegedly Hossein from Shiraz, had to do with the fear of America turning off the conflict too quickly, about being a fair weather friend. These are people who have made immense sacrifices for freedom, who know people who were killed in January 2026. And when you hear an Iranian say something like, "I'm willing to tolerate a missile to my house that kills me, so that my compatriots in my country can be free," or when they say things like, "I'm willing to tolerate a decade of blackouts for 8 hours every single day, so that I have a chance at life for the first time after 10 years," the problem is the West does not understand the desperation yet of the Iranian people. The sense of desperation that could drive such a nationalist population to embrace and support foreign intervention. And then to have foreign intervention largely, but not entirely, largely miss that in terms of the targeting. The Israelis, yes, have done a lot of the striking the apparatus of oppression, the Basij, the law enforcement forces, these things. But very few political targets have been struck. It was the supreme leader, it was Ali Larijani, it was the intelligence minister. Otherwise, the majority of these things are military targets. And almost the majority of the personalities have been targeted by the Israelis, not by the Americans. And this gets to a bitter image in the minds of the Iranians as to where will the West be once the conflict stops, and once the regime can't win the war abroad but comes home to crack skulls. We know after the 12-day war, the regime arrested 21,000 people. We know after the protests in January, the regime arrested 55,000 people. We don't know yet what the situation.
They're executing people, amidst this war. It's
Absolutely.
horrible.
And that the executions, plus the news of the executions, plus the things that people are afraid about at night that they tell us about, the Basijis and the paramilitaries having little parades at night out with guns and armored personnel carriers at night, designed to deter and intimidate the population so that in a post-conflict scenario, the population does not come out. I fear that that is working. In a world where the US is talking about civilizational erasure, in a world where a lot of the targets are these big, heavier targets, in a world where we're kind of acclimated to some of these civilian infrastructural targets, and then you don't have this apparatus sufficiently taken down, and you don't have the political elite targeted, but you do have all this commentary in support of the Iranian people. The Iranian people are gonna say, when the rubber hits the road, what did you do? And the real sad thing, and I hate to say this, the real sad thing is even among people I know and respect in DC and around, not in the governments, but around who work in things related to US national security, they're now saying, well, it's up to the Iranians. I was like, it has been up to the Iranians. They have been trying. They haven't been able to go that far. And so people simply crassly say, well, they're supposed to get armed. From where? From how? With what kind of training? And what kind of success did American arms shipments have to the region in Syria or in Afghanistan or in other parts? So we are coming to some very bitter truths that if we let these truths linger and there is no commensurate US policy to change these things, the net beneficiary is the Islamic Republic, where
Right.
they will say, these were the people you wanted help from? The people who in the morning said civilizational erasure, but at night made a ceasefire deal with me? These were the people you wanted help from? That is such a powerful weapon. And not just, I'm not trying to be mean, not just inside Iran, but among the diaspora. Some in the diaspora, some who have only recently turned to become pro-regime after women, life, freedom, who attack their fellow Iranian Americans or Iranians in the diaspora for supporting armed intervention since January, February, March, who people see it as usually one way. People usually see the Republican and the monarchist and the pro-Trump and the pro-Israel vector as, being aggressive online. But I've seen my fair share of the exact opposite side, to be brutally honest with you, backbite and say things about the diaspora and be critical about supporting foreign intervention. And to that end, I'm worried about the tensions within the community, the finger pointing within the community that you did this, you got us there, you said this, you advocated for that. No, you did this first. No, you used to be like this, then you changed. All of these things, all of these things benefit the
Right.
Islamic Republic, which is why it is imperative that the wake up call, the alarm bell, ring here in Washington, which is these are your partners, the Iranian people, to Israel especially. These are your partners on this planet. I don't know a population who has been through what they've been through like the Iranians, who live in a region like they live like the Iranians, but who are still pro-Israel and pro-American. I was just at a school. I was speaking at a university in America, 2, 3 hours from DC. And there was a table of Iranians. I didn't know they were Iranians. It was a public event. It was a debate, actually. And the guy got up, and I didn't know what he was going to say, but he did look Middle Eastern. And I was like, oh, this is going to go very good or very bad. And God bless him, he agreed with everything I said, but he turned to the person I was debating, and he said, I never carried an American flag in my life before. But he's an Iranian immigrant, a university student, graduate student. And he said, I have been carrying it every single day since January. These are the people that Trump will lose. These are the immigrants you want. These are the people that can transform the Middle East. Give them
Right.
a chance.
Absolutely. I appreciate that, Behnam. That was really eye-opening, and we cannot put more emphasis on this. I believe arguably the most pro-American nation in the world. I always say, let's keep it that way. Is there
Unlike the region where a lot of the interventions, and Americans are right to be skeptical of these interventions, and maybe we'll end with this, but in places where there was military force and there was an idea for regime change or democratization, there was a lot of built-in assumptions about social engineering, that we have to do something to this society to get it to want that. The difference with Iran is you don't need to social engineer. The people are already there. 7 years of the Islamic Republic has made this population secular, nationalist, pro-America, and pro-Israel. You have a constituency. Now it's up to you to design the policy, not to lose it. Rather than work to get it, you have to work to keep it.
And this job needs to be finished. I really
Yes.
appreciate that. Behnam, is there anything that we haven't talked about, but you think it's absolutely critical to pay attention to at this moment as the
Maybe
final war?
maybe one last warning about the nuclear. Ironically, that is where the biggest strategic challenge for America will come in the post-conflict situation. It is one where, yes, we have eyes and ears on the program. For what President Trump said, there's satellite coverage. One would assume there's also some level of intelligence penetration based on what the Israelis have been able to do in the past. Who knows? The reason we talk about the North Korea analogy is not to make it to North Korea today, but to North Korea in the 90s, where after the Cold War, they lost their major patron. And the things North Korea was able to do in the 90s brought it to be the threat that it was today, which was North Korea moved towards nuclear weapons capability, especially after, in the mid 2000s, the collapse of the agreed framework. And also, North Korea began to develop longer range missiles, and in particular, moved towards ICBMs later in the mid 2000s. So the path dependent political and military choices, a weak, poor North Korea and then these made due to the hardened national security elite made it the threat that it is today. That's why I want to ring the alarm bell about you can get the military win, and there's no doubt Trump has that win. But what is the strategy that follows so that you can get a political win as well? The Middle East, I've said this before, is littered with military wins that have failed to be translated into political wins. Now is the test of what's the next step? What comes after?
Absolutely. Behnam, I really appreciate you coming back and sharing your insight with us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.